T-minus 15.
On MTV Music Television.
In 1982, I Want My MTV became the focal point of an advertising campaign that featured some of the biggest artists of the era: Pat Benatar, Cyndi Lauper, Madonna, Billy Idol, Stevie Nicks, Mick Jagger, and even Kiss.
Too much is never enough.
The once great music network was at the forefront of music television, well, mainly because it was the only music television.
I want my MTV!
It launched a year earlier under the Warner American Express Satellite Entertainment Company, and over the following 3 decades, it would help shape popular and alternative culture across the United States and beyond. It was a new way for rock stars to connect with their fans. It would air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and deliver literally all of the most iconic music videos any of us had ever seen.
The world's first video music channel, all day, all night, in stereo.
And its goal was to basically kill the radio star. There were, of course, other networks that played music videos in the form of a show, but MTV was the first national network to dedicate its entire programming schedule to music and also create a culture around it.
Or in a 4-hour rock and roll spectacular direct from Russia, and it's only on pay-per-view.
Total Request Live, MTV's Most Wanted, MTV Cribs, MTV Unplugged, and MTV Headbangers Ball were just a handful of the shows aired on the channel that focused around viewer interaction, popular music, and rock star lifestyles.
Rock and roll!
This once epic network also developed one of the biggest reality TV shows to feature rock stars, the Osbournes.
Where do you want me to put my gun, Sharon? Under the bed.
And of course, we can't forget Celebrity Deathmatch that would land on the MTV spin-off channel MTV2 in 1998.
Hey man, you like magic?
MTV became the home of heavy metal for many years, and many believe that Headbangers Ball was a key factor in the development of the popularity of alternative music and heavy metal during the 80s and 90s. And we can't forget Beavis and Butthead, two of the most lovable characters to ever grace a television screen.
Hey, wait a minute. Where are we going? I don't want to go to school.
It also birthed Jackass, Viva La Bam, Pimp My Ride, Battle for Ozfest, and Daria, an animated series focusing on a somewhat cynical teenager that some would say largely represented a vast proportion of the youth of America at the time. It was nothing short of a cultural revolution that swept the nation and championed the very best in rock and metal music for over 3 decades. So what happened? This is I Want My MTV, the death of a generation.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
Friday, the 31st of July, 1981, topping the American Billboard chart was One That You Love by Australian soft rock outfit Air Supply.
Here I am, the one that you love.
Yep, I've never heard of them either, but that's what was popular the day before the launch of MTV.
MTV Music Television, you'll never look at music the same way again.
MTV officially launched on midnight Saturday the 1st of August 1981, but it was only available to residents of New Jersey, home of the Misfits no less. However, they definitely weren't going to get any coverage on this network anytime soon. MTV would quite literally launch. They showed footage of an actual rocket launch with the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll," signifying a new age of music evolution. The first ever music video to be played on MTV was a pretty accurate one looking back. It was a song called "Video Killed the Radio Star" by English new wave group The Buggles, originally released September 7th, 1979. Before MTV, this video was aired on British music television show called Top of the Pops that was first broadcast in 1964 by the BBC.
No, but this one was a former record of the week of mine. The Buggles and "Video Killed the Radio Star."
For the UK at least, this is where the general public could watch various artists and pop stars perform their latest singles, or watch the latest music videos. For better or worse, MTV sort of bridges the whole country together, almost like the BBC does in England. It's opened up everything so wide that it's possible for everyone to have different ideas. MTV was particularly unique as it was the first television network to focus only on music, and also delivered that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In these very early days, music videos would be introduced by video jockeys or VJs, similar to radio's old DJs or disc jockeys.
I'm Martha Quinn. The music will continue non-stop on MTV Music Television, the newest component of your stereo system. I'll be with you right after Alan.
MTV struggled at first, though, as cable was still a luxury in most households. An advertising campaign was put together called I Want My MTV, and it featured a whole host of popular artists of the era and newcomers.
I want my MTV. I want my MTV.
The Police had seen huge success with Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic, Pat Benatar's Shadow of the Night was a smash hit, and Billy Idol and Cyndi Lauper were among some of the biggest names in pop music at the time. So MTV's general idea was pretty simple: get famous musicians that would appeal to a younger audience and make them think MTV was cool. However, on March the 10th, 1983, a short film by arguably the greatest pop star of all time would debut on the soon-to-be iconic TV channel, and became one of the most important milestones in the network's history. Billie Jean by Michael Jackson was released on January the 3rd, 1983, and MTV initially refused to air the music video. MTV wanted to focus on rock music, and they didn't think a black artist would fit the channel. The president of Michael Jackson's record label gave MTV an ultimatum. He told them the following: I'm pulling everything we have off the air, all our products. I'm not going to give you any more videos. And I'm going to go public and fucking tell them about the fact you don't want to play music by a black guy. The idea that MTV might have been somewhat more focused on white artists is also something that David Bowie picked up on. In an MTV interview in 1983, he said this: It's a solid enterprise and it's got a lot going for it. I'm just floored by the fact that there are so few black artists featured on it. Why is that? It's evident in the fact that the only few black artists one does see are on at about 2:30 in the morning until around 6 a.m. Very few are featured predominantly during the day. At the time, CBS Records were looking to promote Michael Jackson's 6th studio album, Thriller, initially released on November the 29th, 1982.
It's only a movie. It's not funny.
And this is where record labels truly started to see the power of music television. After Billie Jean had been put into heavy rotation on the network, Thriller went on to sell an additional 10 million copies. MTV made a huge impact. Heavy rotation took you from selling 1 million albums to 20 million albums, and that meant a lot of dough. And this early success is the reason Michael Jackson's record label decided to produce the music video for Thriller in the first place, an epic 14-minute long zombie-fueled dance-off in the form of a short horror film, featuring Michael Jackson and his horde of zombies. Now arguably the most iconic music video and choreography of all time. This really helped to solidify MTV's cultural relevance, and that culture was about to get really loud.
What is this garbage you're watching?
The 1980s are seen by many as the golden era of rock and heavy metal music, and it was sweeping the globe. Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Def Leppard, Scorpions, AC/DC, Motley Crue, Metallica, Van Halen, and even more were topping the charts all over the world. And although metal was making waves, some still didn't take it too seriously, which was overly exaggerated by the 1984 comedy mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap.
What do you call this? Well, this piece is called Lick My Love Pump.
A fake documentary movie that followed the lives of the fictional heavy metal group Spinal Tap, a film that simply made fun of everything heavy metal. MTV had certainly started to make a name for itself. English rock giants Dire Straits released Money for Nothing in 1985, and with it came an, at the time, cutting-edge music video. The song itself references MTV, and Sting of The Police even sings I Want My MTV as a backing vocal.
You play the guitar on the MTV.
And it became the #1 music video on MTV for that year. Many of MTV's top videos were still largely dominated by pop music, although in 1986 and 87 we saw Run DMC and Aerosmith with Walk This Way, Ozzy Osbourne with Shot in the Dark, Motley Crue, Girls, 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 Whitesnake, Still of the Night, and a little bit of ZZ Top, ranking as some of the most popular on the network. So metal and rock were without doubt breaking through to a more mainstream audience.
It's time for Metal News with your co-anchor people, Ozzy Osbourne and Dee Snider.
But something had been cooking up on the network 2 years prior. In 1985, they launched a show called Heavy Metal Mania. A weekly show that ran every week, hosted by Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. Sister formed back in the early 70s but saw huge success with their 1984 singles We're Not Gonna Take It and I Wanna Rock. Snider would run through the biggest heavy metal videos of the week and also welcomed guests onto the show, Paul Stanley of Kiss, Ozzy Osbourne, and my personal favorite, Lemmy of Motorhead. Rob Halford of Judas Priest even teamed up with Heavy Metal Mania on MTV to give away the motorbike used in their 1986 music video for Locked In, taken from the album Turbo that also featured Turbo Lover. And 1 year later, we saw the launch of what is now considered to be the most revered heavy metal show of all time, Headbangers Ball. In 1987, MTV would launch Headbangers Ball. The first episode would air on April the 18th, and it would be hosted by Lemmy and Phil Taylor of Motorhead. This new weekly series would showcase some of the biggest rock and metal videos of the era. The first episode would include music videos by Cinderella, Dokken, and Aerosmith, amongst others, which I do find funny, as I'm pretty sure Lemmy hated bands like Cinderella and Dokken, but he was probably just happy to get the free Jack Daniels MTV most likely provided him. Headbangers Ball did give a lot of airtime to hair metal bands of the day, but also gave time to more aggressive artists including Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, and even King Diamond, amongst others. The show even went on the road with the Headbangers Ball tour through April and May of 1989 with Anthrax, Exodus, and Halloween. Guns N' Roses even made an appearance in 1987, and after the interview, they decided to do what rock stars do best and destroy the place. This was the same year Guns N' Roses had released their debut record, Appetite for Destruction. MTV had become such an integral part to youth culture that a new phrase was even coined to describe kids that grew up with MTV. It was called the MTV generation.
Nothing you say can upset us. We're the MTV generation.
MTV helped to define style and fashion trends throughout the 80s and 90s. It was kind of an early version of influencer culture, but instead of being fueled by nobodies on Instagram, it was fueled by real rock stars. And if you want to follow this nobody on Instagram, There's a link in the description. Judas Priest's Rob Halford even felt the platform was so in touch with modern culture at the time that he felt it was the best platform to announce to the world that he was gay. Surprisingly, not a lot of people knew. I don't know how. It was beautiful. It was very unplanned. It was one of those things where I'm at MTV in New York. I'm talking about a project that I was working on called 2 with myself and John 5, the amazing guitar player. I was doing the rounds in New York City and ended up at MTV talking about this project. And in the casual course of the conversation, we were talking about the overall music and the direction and the feelings. And I said something to the effect of, well, speaking as a gay man. And then I heard the producer's clipboard bounce on the floor. It was one of those gay, sharp intakes of breath. Oh my God, he's come out. In 1992, an American music comedy film was released by Paramount Pictures based on an SNL sketch by Mike Myers. It followed the life of Wayne Campbell and Garth Algar.
Alice, is this cool?
Yeah, come on in.
They hosted their own public access TV show called Wayne's World from Wayne's Basement. It was essentially Headbangers Ball on a budget.
Wayne's World, party time, excellent.
At this time, rock and metal culture was so widespread thanks to the rise of MTV that it's easy to argue that Wayne's World could credit its success to the popularity of shows like Headbangers Ball. Wayne's World managed to rake in over $183 million at the box office. Headbangers Ball truly became a global presence. A series of road trip shows were produced, seeing MTV make shows at Monsters of Rock Festival in the UK, and even as far as Russia for the Moscow Peace Festival in 1989. Headbangers Ball in the 90s would even showcase the likes of Pantera, and this was at the height of Pantera's fame. Headbangers Ball dominated the late 80s and early 90s, and as the world saw the decline of metal with the rise of grunge, MTV already had a new show that would continue to feed the MTV generation. As culture shifted away from the dangerous and wild lifestyle of heavy metal and rock and roll, grunge took over the stage, with bands such as Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, and Nirvana taking the spotlight. And of course, MTV had you covered.
Coming this fall, Nirvana Unplugged.
It was almost impossible to watch MTV in the 90s and not see Black Hole Sun or Man in a Box being played around the clock. This decade saw 3 of the biggest albums of the generation: Nevermind by Nirvana and Facelift by Alice in Chains, then Super Unknown by Soundgarden in 1994. And although this genre was loud, aggressive, dirty, and full of distortion, MTV showed us a lighter side to this dark creativity. MTV Unplugged launched in 1989, and it was a pretty simple premise: live music by the biggest bands, but on an acoustic and more intimate level. This spawned one of the most memorable live performances of the decade with Nirvana.
Years and years around.
MTV Unplugged in New York was released on November the 1st, 1994, around 6 months after the death of Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of Nirvana. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, so technically this was the first music television network to actually land an album on the Billboard chart and take the #1 spot. Nirvana ran through some of their now classic catalogue and also performed their rendition of David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World. It's difficult to say whether grunge died with Kurt Cobain or if it was already on its way out after a pretty short-lived lifespan from a commercial point of view. However, MTV, despite 2 decades of being the all-powerful cultural guru through the 80s and 90s, was entering its final stage. The long-revered music video was soon to run out of tape. Before we enter the new millennium, though, we can't forget the importance of 2 incredibly suave, thought-provoking, and intellectual figures that did more for metal music than any music television network ever could achieve. That's right, Beavis and Butthead. Some say these lovable idiots saved metal from dying in the 90s. Between September the 22nd, 1992 and November the 28th, 1997, MTV aired over 200 episodes of Beavis and Butthead.
He said anus.
They could be seen headbanging to some of the biggest metal anthems of the day and ripping into some of the worst.
This sucks.
Beavis and Butthead connected with the existing MTV generation and the younger generation that were just discovering alternative music. And it was one of the highest rated shows MTV had ever produced at the time. Even Trey Parker and Matt Stone cited Beavis and Butthead as one of the main influences for South Park. They are cruel to animals, they vandalize their neighbors, they torture their teachers. Their libidos rage unchecked, except by the uniform unwillingness of the female sex to associate with them. And they are the biggest phenomenon on MTV since the heyday of Michael Jackson. Beavis and Butthead pretty much represented the average teen metalhead of America. They didn't care about anything, they just wanted to listen to heavy shit and go against the norm. Not only was this the quintessential era for the MTV generation, it was also the beginning of the end. It's safe to say that during the 80s and 90s, MTV had claimed the crown of cultural king. Anyone that wanted to be cool, look stylish, or know everything about the most hip and happening bands followed the network like it was a religion. But at the turn of the new millennium, MTV would begin its descent into oblivion. It was still going strong at the beginning of the new century thanks to Jackass, and then Viva La Bam continued the chaos in 2003, but it seemed watching people destroy their own bodies and other people's property wouldn't be enough to save this soon-to-be dying TV network. So what killed it?
That's not good.
Reality TV. Yeah, the worst thing to ever happen to entertainment ever. And ironically, the very guy that was revered for being known as somewhat of the godfather of heavy metal, or more commonly, the Prince of Darkness, would be the same guy that helped destroy MTV, Ozzy Osbourne. Okay, so that's a bit of an over-exaggeration. I mean, anyone that's ever watched even one episode of The Osbournes would know Ozzy had absolutely no idea what the fuck was going on in any of these episodes. And that's kind of what made the show incredible. The Osbournes, which was a reality TV show that followed the lives of, you guessed it, The Osbournes, first aired on March the 5th, 2002, and it ran for 4 seasons up to 2005. But reality TV was already kind of in the mix at MTV. You had The Real World that first aired back in the early 90s, then shows like The Real Orange County, Surf Girls, Fraternity Life, and the list of garbage goes on and on and on. People were just kind of bored of watching rock stars. They wanted to see normal people doing normal things, and they wanted drama. They wanted the drama that they see in their daily life, and reality TV gave people exactly that. And eventually MTV just said, fuck it. Who needs rock and metal anymore? In fact, we don't even need music. Let's just produce as many garbage reality TV shows as we can possibly think of. Now, of course, you also have the fact that the MTV generation had also just grown up. Kids that watched MTV in the 80s and 90s were turning into adults with real jobs, families, and 401ks. The MTV generation didn't have time anymore to sit in front of the TV for hours on end and watch cool shows about rock and metal. And honestly, this is pretty much why I started Raw Music TV in the first place. I missed all of this stuff. I missed learning about awesome rock and metal bands, their history, and how these bands came to be in the first place. Hence why I now have around 40 documentaries on various different groups, with lots more in the pipeline that I'll be releasing over the coming year, so make sure you subscribe to this channel. I was lucky enough to be a teenager during the MTV generation, and I'm super grateful for it. But it's a shame that this generation has died. It was truly unique, and it was pretty fucking epic.